A man who spent 14 years paying for his daughter's dental work, her wedding, and her husband's failed restaurant, found out through a baby monitor that his own family had already picked out his funeral suit. Not his casket, his suit. That's how sure they were. I wasn't walking out of that hospital. My name is Walt Kessinger. I'm 63 years old, and until this past spring, I thought I understood exactly what my life had bought me. I was wrong. And I found that out flat on my back, an oxygen line taped under my nose, listening to my daughter and her husband decide, out loud, whether keeping me around was still a good investment. Let me back up. I've run Kessinger and Son Cabinetry out of Millbrook, Ohio for 31 years. Started it in my father's pole barn with a table saw and a stack of lumber I couldn't fully pay for. Built it into a shop with 8 employees and a wait list that runs 8 months out. The son in the name was aspirational. I never had one. What I had was Renee. Renee's my daughter. Not by blood. I met her mother, Carol, when Renee was 6 years old, and I adopted her legally 2 years later, the same week I taught her to ride a bike in the church parking lot. Carol passed when Renee was 19, breast cancer, fast and cruel. After that, it was just the two of us, and I made her a promise at that funeral I intended to keep for the rest of my life. She would never want for anything, not as long as I had breath in me. I meant that. God help me, I meant every word. I paid for her braces, her prom dress, 4 years at Ohio State she didn't have to take a single loan out for. When she married Derek 8 years ago, I paid for the wedding, the whole thing. 62 guests, a barn venue out past Chillicothe that cost more than my first truck. Derek wanted to open a restaurant 2 years into the marriage, some upscale barbecue concept downtown, and I co-signed a $180,000 SBA loan to make it happen. My name, my credit, my risk. It failed in 14 months. I didn't say I told you so. I just kept paying down what was left of that note quietly, every month, so it never touched their credit, only mine. Welcome to Southern Grit Stories. Stay a while. This one's going to sit with you. Hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. I read every single one. Here's the thing you need to understand about me before we go any further. I'm not an emotional man. 31 years of running a cabinet shop, standing over a table saw 10 hours a day, teaches you to keep your hands steady and your mouth shut. But I had one soft place, one thing in this world that belonged only to me. A 1,965 Airstream, Safari, 22 feet, aluminum shell, the whole thing rusted down to the studs when I bought it off a widow in Chillicothe 11 years ago. I spent every Sunday afternoon for 6 years bringing it back, new subfloor, hand-bent aluminum skin panels, a walnut interior I built myself out of scraps from the shop. That trailer was the only thing I ever built that had my name on it, and nobody else's. Renee used to tease me about it, called it my second wife. I'd laugh and tell her that trailer never once asked me for money, which was more than I could say for some people. And she'd laugh too, because back then it was still a joke between us and not a prophecy. I remember a night about a year and a half ago, out in the driveway, running a chamois over the Airstream skin in the porch light. Derek came out with a folder of blueprints under his arm, some second restaurant concept, a food truck this time, smaller, safer, he said. He spread the drawings on the tailgate of my truck. "This is the one, Walt," he said. "This is how I finally pay you back for everything." I looked at those drawings a long while. Then I looked at him. "I believe you," I told him, and I meant that too. He clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You're the only father I've ever really had, you know that? Not father-in-law. Father." I stood there afterward with my hands still resting on that aluminum skin, and I felt something I don't let myself feel often. I thought, clear as a bell, this is what it was all for. This is the moment I finally got it right. I had a family, not by blood, by choice. Turns out choice runs out the exact second the math stops adding up in your favor. But I didn't know that yet. Not that night. I wouldn't know it for another year and a half, not until I was lying in a hospital bed with a monitor taped to my chest, listening through a baby monitor to the two people I loved most on this earth, doing arithmetic on whether I was worth the cost of saving. It started on a Thursday in early June. I was out at the shop, alone, running a slab of walnut through the planer, and my vision just folded, like somebody grabbed the edges of the room and pulled them toward the center. I remember gripping the edge of the workbench and thinking, clear as day, this is it right here, on my own shop floor, 40 feet from the door. It wasn't the end. Not yet. My shop foreman, a kid named Marcus, who'd worked for me 9 years, found me on the ground and called 911. I was at Millbrook General inside 18 minutes. Pancreatic mass, that's what they found. The ER doctor, a young woman with tired eyes and a kind voice, sat on the edge of my bed and didn't dress it up. Mr. Kessinger, this is operable, but not here. You need the surgical oncology team at Ohio State's Cancer Center in Columbus. And you need to move fast. Carol had died of cancer in this same county 14 years earlier. I understood exactly what move fast meant. Renee was in the room the whole time, holding my hand so tight it left a mark. When the doctor stepped out, she leaned over the rail, eyes wet, and said the words I needed to hear. We're doing this, Dad, whatever it costs. I don't care. I believed her completely, every syllable. Columbus called 2 days later, once my scans went through. Dr. Whitfield, calm, direct, no wasted words. Mr. Kessinger, we can do this procedure, and your odds are good. Call it 80% for a full recovery at your staging. But I have to be straight with you about the financial side. This surgical team, this facility, out-of-network timeline, we need an $80,000 deposit within 72 hours to hold your slot. After that window closes, the next opening is 8 weeks out. 8 weeks. My local oncologist had already told me, quietly, that 8 weeks might be optimistic for a mass growing at this rate. 72 hours. $80,000. Renee squeezed my hand that night in the vinyl hospital chair, looking more exhausted than I'd seen her look in 8 years of marriage to Derek. I'll go to the credit union first thing tomorrow, she said. We'll take a line against the house. It'll clear in time. I promise, Dad. I promise. A promise. Funny thing about those. They're only as good as the person keeping them once nobody's listening. They sent me home for 2 days to stabilize before the transfer to Columbus. Renee set me up in my own bedroom, the same room I'd slept in alone since Carol passed, with a heart monitor clipped to my finger and an old baby monitor, Renee's own, from when she was small, that I'd kept in a closet for no reason I could explain until that week sitting on the nightstand. Its twin unit down in the kitchen so I could call for anything without hollering down the hallway. That first evening home, weaker than I expected to be, throat like sandpaper from 2 days of hospital air, I just needed water. I could hear voices drifting up from the kitchen, Renee and Derek, low murmurs, the ordinary sound of family that used to be the best noise in my house. I reached for the monitor, found the talk switch, and my finger hovered right over it. And that's when I heard Derek's voice come through clear as anything, sharper than I'd ever heard him talk about me before. Renee, you cannot take a line against this house for this. I froze, finger still hovering, not pressed down yet. Your dad is 63, Derek went on, and I heard a fork click against a plate, casual, like he was reading off a grocery list. What if he doesn't make it? You'll be sitting there with a second mortgage and nothing to show for it, and I'll have to figure out how we survive that on top of everything else. My hand pulled back on its own, some instinct older than thought. Don't press it. Listen. Renee's voice came next, and it broke something in me worse than Derek's ever could have, because it was quiet and reasonable and hers. I know, she said, but he's my dad, Derek. I'm not saying don't love him, Derek said. I'm saying 80 grand on maybe an 80% chance isn't a sure thing. Walt's had a good run. He built the business. He raised you. He doesn't owe anybody anything else. He wouldn't want you going into debt over long odds. I sat there with the oxygen line hissing against my cheek, hand frozen an inch above a button that would have let them know I could hear every word. Let them stop. I didn't press it. Not yet. Let's see how deep this goes. Downstairs, dinner kept going, like it was any other Thursday. Like I wasn't one floor up, dying of thirst, listening to two people run cost-benefit math on my life like it was a line item on a spreadsheet. Besides, Derek said, and I heard him take the kind of breath a man takes before he says something he's been sitting on. Let's be honest for a second. I want you to sit with that phrase the way I did because I sat with it for 3 full seconds before he finished the thought, And in those 3 seconds, I made a decision that changed the rest of my life. I decided to keep listening. Walt slowed way down the last couple years, Derek said, chair creaking like he was settling in. He barely toes that Airstream anymore. And the shop, I mean. If something happens to him, that business is basically half ours anyway, the way the loan's structured. Why would we bury ourselves in debt trying to save a man who's already handed us most of what matters? A man who's already handed us most of what matters. That's what I was to him. Not a father-in-law, not family, an estate that hadn't finished transferring yet. Renee's voice, quiet now, wavering. I know, she said. The doctor said there are no guarantees. If I risk the house and lose him anyway, I've got nothing left for us. Us. Not for me and Dad. Us, her and Derek. Like I was already a subtraction she was budgeting around. Exactly, Derek said, warm now, closing the deal. We look out for each other. That's what family does. Family. I lay there with a needle taped to the back of my hand, throat like a dry riverbed, listening to my own family redefine that word in real time. One floor above the workshop I'd spent 31 years building with those same hands. I never pressed the button, not once. I let my arm fall back to the mattress, because somewhere in that stillness I understood something important. If I said something now, they'd apologize, they'd backpedal, they'd smooth it over so fast I'd never actually know what they believed when they thought no one could hear them. So I let them keep talking. Let them finish every ugly word of it while my throat burned, and nobody thought to check on the man who'd had a cardiac scare 2 days before. About 40 minutes later, not 5 minutes, 40, a good long while where nobody climbed those stairs, I heard footsteps. Renee. She came in, sat on the edge of the bed, brushed my hair back the way she used to when she was small and I'd come home covered in sawdust. For 1 second I let myself believe the last 40 minutes hadn't happened. Did you get the paperwork started at the credit union? I asked. My voice came out cracked, barely there. She looked me dead in the eye. They said the line wouldn't clear in time, Dad. It's out of our hands. Out of our hands. I nodded. Didn't argue. Didn't cry. Just nodded, like a man accepting a weather report, and let her think she'd gotten away clean. And I finally understood something I should have understood 16 years earlier, the week I adopted her. I wasn't her father anymore, in the way that mattered right now. I was the account she was managing on her way to a decision she'd already made 3 hours before she walked up those stairs. Still no water. Nobody brought me water that whole night. I want you to understand something about me, because it matters for what happens next. I don't act in the heat of the moment. 31 years running power equipment teaches you that the man who panics is the man who loses a finger, or worse, you wait. You assess. You act once, decisively, when you're certain. I waited until midnight. Renee was asleep down the hall. The house was dark except for the porch light I'd left on out of habit for 30 years. I picked up my phone, hands still weak, and scrolled to a contact I hadn't texted in almost 2 years. Hollis Bramwell. Runs a vintage trailer restoration business out of Athens, has wanted my Airstream since he first saw it at a rally 6 years back, offers me real money for it every single time our paths cross. I typed it out slow, one thumb in the dark. Hollis. The Airstream. Is 78 still on the table? The reply came back in under 3 minutes. For that trailer. Always. What's going on, Walt? Need it gone by tomorrow afternoon. Cashier's check. I'll explain later. Say less. I'll have the trailer hitched there by 2. 6 years of Sunday afternoons in that shell. Hand-bent aluminum. Walnut. I'd milled myself. And I let it go in the time it takes to boil an egg, because somewhere between that monitor and that lie, I stopped being a sentimental man and became a practical one. Practical men don't beg for their own lives. They pay for them. The next morning I told Renee I needed quiet to rest. She had errands anyway. Something about picking up supplies for Derek's food truck billed out ironic, given what I was about to do with a trailer of my own. At 2 o'clock sharp, I heard Hollis's diesel truck pull into my driveway. I was sitting on the porch in a folding chair, oxygen tank beside me, watching through eyes that felt heavier than they should at 63. Hollis got out first, big man, gray beard, a handshake like a bench vice. He took one look at me, pale, tubing under my nose, moving slow, and his easy grin faded. "Walt, what happened to you?" I didn't have an answer that fit in a sentence. "You sure about this, buddy?" he asked, quiet, just between us. "Never been more sure of anything, Hollis," I said. He didn't push. Old Appalachian stock, the kind of man who understands some deals aren't really about the object changing hands. His crew winched that Airstream up onto the flatbed, careful and slow, like they were moving something alive. Hollis handed me a cashier's check for $80,000, even $2,000, over his usual number, which I never asked for and will never forget. He folded it into my hand and gripped my shoulder. "Get better, Walt. She'll be sitting in my lot if you ever want her back." "I won't." But it was a kind thing to say. I watched that flatbed pull out of my driveway and disappear down County Road 12 toward the highway. 6 years of my life strapped down like cargo. And I felt something I didn't expect. Not grief. Clarity. If I was going to die, I decided, I was going to die, knowing I paid for my own life. I wasn't going to beg for it. And if I lived well, that was a different conversation, one I intended to have entirely on my own terms. Columbus took less time to live through than it took to explain. Renee drove me down the next morning, well inside Dr. Whitfield's 72-hour window. I checked in with a cashier's check already folded in my jacket pocket, told the woman at intake I'd handled the deposit myself, and didn't explain further. Wasn't her business. The surgery went about as well as they come. Dr. Whitfield told Renee afterward that the margins looked clean, that my numbers were better than she'd hoped for. I landed on the right side of 80%. I won't walk you through the recovery room, the tubes, the monitors. That's not the story. The story is what happened after I came home, because I came home a different man, not broken, not weak. Recalibrated is the word I keep landing on, and I mean it clinically, not poetically. First thing I did, still in a compression brace, barely 4 days back in Millbrook, was open a separate account at the bank 2 towns over. Redirected my draws from the business there, instead of the joint household account Renee had access to. Told nobody. She noticed the household balance sitting flatter than usual within 2 weeks, and I told her it was medical bills clearing. She believed it, same as I'd believed her line of credit story 2 months before. Funny how a lie sounds different depending on which side of it you're standing. I want to give you a few small moments from those weeks, because they matter more than the big ones. Big betrayals are easy to spot. It's the small ones that tell you the truth. One evening, still healing, I asked Renee to help me read a prescription label, my eyes still adjusting to a new medication. "In a minute," she said. Thumb scrolling her phone, Derek had texted about a walk-in cooler for the food truck. She answered him before she ever got up to help me. A few days later, Derek stopped by, didn't ask how I was recovering, walked straight to my shop, grabbed a router off my wall without asking, and on his way out, mentioned the walk-in cooler compressor was making a noise, and I should probably get somebody out to look at it soon. Then the phone call. I was resting in the den, door half open, and heard Renee on the phone with her aunt in Dayton, voice bright with relief. "He's doing better than we expected," she said. "Honestly, I think we dodged a bullet." She meant it medically. I heard something else entirely. I heard, "We almost wasted $80,000 on you." I sat in that den and ran the math on my own family, the same cold way Derek had run it on me through that monitor. Every day I saw it clearer. I wasn't a man they loved. I was a risk they'd almost had to absorb. And the only reason either of them was relieved I'd lived was so they wouldn't have to carry the guilt of the alternative. That's not love. That's liability management. And I was done being a liability. 2 months after the surgery, Renee came to me glowing, wanting to plan a family dinner. "You're fully recovered, Dad. We should celebrate." A celebration dinner for the man whose life she'd tried to talk her husband out of saving. I said yes, smiled, told her it sounded wonderful, because I'd been waiting 2 months for exactly this kind of dinner. If you've stuck with me this far, drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I want to know who's sitting with me for this part. The night came. Derek showed up already talking, some update about a second food truck location he was scouting, hinting he might need me to co-sign again down the road. I let that hang in the air without answering. We sat at my own dining table. I'd smoked a brisket myself, the way Carol used to for family dinners, because I wanted this one to feel like the ones we used to have, right before I made sure it never would again. Derek didn't wait for the plates to get passed. Before you get too comfortable, Walt, he said, reaching for the beans without looking up. That walk-in cooler at the truck build is basically dead. I need probably $6,000 to replace the compressor system. It's your name on the loan anyway. Might as well be your problem. I set my fork down slow, looked at him. Is that right? I said, quiet. Yeah, man, Derek said, oblivious, reaching for more beans. I've been carrying this whole build practically solo. $6,000. From the man who 2 months earlier called me an already settled estate over a baby monitor because keeping me alive cost too much to be worth the gamble. I reached into my jacket pocket. My hands shook a little, not from nerves, from a body still healing, from a surgery none of them had paid 1 cent toward. I pulled out a folder and set it on the table between the brisket and the beans, and I looked at my daughter and her husband, the woman I'd raised since she was 6 years old, the man I'd called son-in-law and meant it, and I said the only thing that felt true. Before we get to the cooler, Derek, I said, let's talk about a few things I've been sitting on for 2 months. I opened the folder slow, no drama in my hands. Just a man laying cards on a table he'd been dealt weeks ago and only now decided to play. You two were deeply concerned about the finances if my surgery didn't work out. I said, you called my life a bad bet on 80% odds, so I liquidated the one thing I owned outright and paid the deposit myself. Didn't touch a dime of the house. I pulled out the first document, set it in the center of the table, bill of sale, title transfer, my Airstream, signed over to Hollis Bramwell, dated the morning after that monitor conversation. Derek stared at it like it was written in a language he didn't speak. Wait, you sold the trailer? Walt, that's insane. You love that thing. I did, I said. But it seemed like a fair trade. My life for a trailer. Pretty good deal, don't you think? Nobody answered that. I turned to Derek next. Since I'm apparently such a high-risk asset, I said, I had a conversation with First Community Bank. Turns out they agreed. It's not smart for a man who might not make it past a Thursday to keep personally guaranteeing someone else's restaurant debt. I slid a letter across the table. Derek grabbed it, eyes scanning, color draining out of his face line by line. This is formal notice, I said. I've withdrawn my personal guarantee on the food truck loan, effective this morning. You've got 30 days to secure your own collateral, or the bank calls the balance. You can't do that, Derek said, voice cracking. This is everything I've built. No, I said, and I kept my voice level, because I'd promised myself I would. This is everything I built for you. You just managed it. And 2 months ago, over a baby monitor, you told my daughter I wasn't worth the risk of saving, so I stopped being your risk to manage. Renee had gone very still, watching all this with the particular quiet of a woman realizing the storm hadn't reached her yet, but it was close. I pulled the third document. Renee, I said, and I let her name sit there a second before I kept going. Effective today, I've transferred the deed on this house into a trust. You and Derek are welcome to stay as long as you need, but the mortgage, the taxes, the upkeep, that's yours from here forward. I've been covering the difference between what you two bring in and what this house actually costs for 6 years without either of you knowing it. That ends this month. Dad, we can't absorb that overnight. Then you've got some decisions to make, I said, like she hadn't spoken. Her face had gone the color of dishwater. You're doing this over a conversation, she said. A conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I heard everything, Renee, I said, quiet, even. I heard Derek calculate my death like a bad stock pick. I heard him call my life a maybe. And I heard you agree with him. Dad, I was scared, Renee said, hands shaking as she gripped the table edge. The doctor was throwing around numbers and I panicked. I was trying to protect all of us. Don't, I said, and something in my voice made her stop mid-breath. Don't dress up a lie as protection. You made your position clear 2 months ago. You just didn't have the nerve to say it to my face. You set it into a baby monitor, and then you lied to me an hour later while I was still waiting on the glass of water I never got. Derek slammed his palm flat on the table, rattling the beans. You're not even her real father, he said. You married into this. You don't get to punish us like you built us. There it is. 16 years boiled down to one sentence, right when it mattered least and hurt the most. I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eye, the same way Renee had looked into mine when she lied about the credit union. I adopted her when she was 8 years old, I said. I paid for every year of her education. I co-signed your restaurant loan with my own name and my own risk. I built her a life so she'd never have to worry the way her mother and I worried when we were young and broke. I did all of that because I thought you were my family, not because I expected a return. I let the silence stretch just long enough to hurt. But you taught me a business lesson over that monitor, Derek. Never throw good money after bad. My investment in this family ended the night the two of you priced out my death over dinner. Nobody said anything for a moment. Just the hum of the AC, my AC, working fine, and the smell of brisket going cold on 3 untouched plates. I stood, picked up my own plate, carried it to the kitchen, the way I would on any other night. Behind me I heard the panic finally land. Dad, please, we didn't mean... Renee's voice cracked, high and desperate now, all the composure gone. We were just trying to protect ourselves. Protect ourselves. Not protect me. Not once, in 2 months, had either of them reached for that word about me. Renee broke down at the table the way she used to as a little girl, hands over her face, shoulders shaking. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her a moment. 16 years, sitting right there in front of me, dissolving into a puddle of mascara and regret. Renee, I said, you chose your comfort over my life. I'll still cover your health insurance premium, because I made a promise to your mother at her graveside, and I intend to keep that part of it. But as far as anything else goes, you lost your father in that bedroom the night you told me the bank rejected us. You just didn't know it yet. Derek left within the hour, didn't say goodbye, gravel spraying off my driveway as he peeled out. Renee sat alone at that table a long while. I know because I could see her from the hallway, cold brisket, 3 photocopied legal notices, staring at nothing, finally understanding that protecting her comfort had cost her every ounce of trust that used to live in this house. I went upstairs that night, not to my own bedroom, the one with the baby monitor still sitting on the nightstand, the same little speaker that had told me exactly who my family really was. I went to the guest room instead, pulled a suitcase down from the closet shelf, packed it slow, methodical, the way I've learned to do everything now. It's been about 6 weeks since that dinner. Derek's food truck business is still standing. Barely he found a private lender at a rate that'll take him years to climb out from under. Renee moved out 3 weeks ago into a small rental across town, said she needed room to think, and for the first time in a long while I believed she meant what she said instead of what she thought I wanted to hear. The shop lot where the Airstream used to sit is empty now. Some evenings I still walk out there anyway, flip on the light, and just stand in the space where 6 years of Sunday afternoons used to live. I don't regret selling it, not for 1 second, but I won't pretend the quiet out there doesn't sit heavy on certain nights. They say forgiveness is the mark of a strong man. I've heard preachers say it, read it stitched onto more pillows than I can count. But I learned something different. Lying in that hospital bed in Columbus, tubes running into my arm, machines counting my own heartbeat for me because for a few hours I couldn't be trusted to do it myself. I learned that a man who forgives too fast is just teaching people how to hurt him again. I didn't leave my family that night at the dinner table. They left me first, through a baby monitor, on a Thursday evening in June. While I lay upstairs too weak to reach for a button, I just finally caught up to where they'd already gone. You should have just brought me that glass of water, Renee. That's all I ever asked for that night. I never got it. But I got everything else back, and it turns out that was worth more than $80,000 ever could be. If this one sat with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I'll see you on the next one.